all caps. He's a very mad machine. So this is what Mad Machine had to say on playing the game before you house rule it. On the one hand, I get it. Don't knock it till you try it. But on the other, this just reminds me of what AD&D grogs tell me about AD&D. Play the game as written. You can't tell what it's like from just reading it. Take the leap of faith, etc. I'd be able to take their advice much more seriously if they could describe why the rules as written are worthwhile, but usually they're just appealing to tradition and or treating true AD&D as some kind of mystical experience that can't be described in words. That type of thinking is profoundly inimical to the way I play games. I don't just house rule, I kit bash rules from different systems together. I want to play my own game, not someone else's. What you said about borrowing other people's house rules is absolutely true. House exists in the context of the table from which they emerged and won't necessarily be a good fit for your own table, but I argue that the rules as written are no different. At best, the rules as written of a game are just a polished form of the author's own house rules. The only other thing they can be is ivory tower design that not even the author uses in actual play, which incidentally is true of much of AD&D. In my opinion, every rule you choose should be critically assessed for whether it is a good fit for your table. Every one, raw or not. Raw being rules as written. Testing a rule out in play can be an excellent way to do this, but if you embrace your radical freedom to run any type of game you want, you have more possible rule sets that you could ever try out yourself. Every rule from every game you have ever played in the past, as well as any rule you could possibly conceive of, on top of every possible minor variant. The rule as written you're looking at is at your fingertips, and you must choose between them, preferably with a strong justification for the choice you make. All other things being equal, because somebody wrote down in a book is not a very strong justification. And the interesting thing is, I agree with pretty much this, but you can do this when you come from a place of experience. And what I've seen is a lot of folks come in without that experience, and yet they're still looking out for all these house rules. So what this person's saying is absolutely true, and it's kind of how I want to put things together. I think I see a lot of folks who have some experience putting things together, but there are a lot of people who haven't. And my video was really more framed at those who don't have that kind of experience. But even then, I would say there's no real harm in giving it a session and seeing what comes of it, which is, I would say, ultimately, even AD&D. Now, for whatever reason, AD&D is a system that, as I've talked to a lot of people, my own experience and people that I've talked to, I've not seen anybody who was just like, yeah, we played everything by the book. I haven't seen it. Everyone seemed to play it as some kind of modular setup from which they pulled different rules as they wanted. And, I mean, I was no different. And even though I was a kid, somehow we still figured out, maybe because we read it and went, oh, God, too much, that we just pulled back or what. But yeah, I mean, the whole, he calls them AD&D grogs. That's that kind of bro SR thing. It's, oh, you got to play everything rules as written, AD&D, whatever. But I question whether even they are playing all the rules as written. And as folks have pointed out, the rules contradict themselves in places. They're not clear in places. So when you say rules as written, like which rules as written are you talking about? Captain Cook says, one of the problems of hiring people is the charisma factor. Which character or characters is going to do the hiring? Which also means that they are in quote-unquote command of those hirelings, and only those that they themselves hired. And the more they hire, the more officer types they need to keep in formation and from routing at the first sign of trouble. Skeletons are pretty scary to a zero-level fighter or a torchbearer. That's absolutely true. So you don't really want an army. What you want is a small team of muscle and a couple of specialists, maybe a dwarf for a dungeon or an elf in a forest. Actually, elves are pretty darn good in dungeons too, as written. But yeah, I think that's also, I think, pretty sound. I don't know if I have much to add to that. Maybe this was a good conversation, and this is the one from David. Been subscribed for a year. Good going, David. This comment here is responding to the video I did about brainstorming skills, because I'm working on a skill system that can easily bolt into kind of a BX-style OSR game without being an all-encompassing skill system. I'm not trying to bring in 3rd edition type skills or some kind of GURPS-style skills or basic role-playing, Call of Cthulhu type skills, just something simple. So I'm going with, my idea right now is kind of using the sort of X in 6 approach and tweaking it slightly, and then giving you some way to kind of mitigate those with a skill, but a skill being something very kind of specific and situational, not something super broad. And that's kind of what I've been working through, is figuring out, well, what does that mean, right? What are the cases where you might have something that's very super specific, or The other part of it is something that I just don't want to role play out. There are just things, depending on the game you play, that you have no desire to role play through all the steps. That's kind of one thing. And the one I used up in this latest video was navigation. In the game that I run, I tend to drill down into overland travel where we're working through it. Time's passing, but I'm not doing 120 feet at a time like I would in a dungeon. But I'm describing the scenery as you're passing by, the look, the feel, the sounds, the smells. I kind of like that. I enjoy it. And so for me, having a singular here's your navigation roll wouldn't make sense because I am prompting. I'm asking the party to interact with this in a more detailed way than just saying I navigate and then all of that is done away. Or I want them to be like, oh, I look where the sun is, or okay, in the description we were given by the ranger in the town back there, we should be looking for a small stream and then follow the stream. Like that's the kind of stuff that I want. Now, in the game that I play in, we are essentially doing it at a very abstracted, zoomed out level where we'll be on the hex map on our, and essentially our player piece will be on a hex, and then we'll be traveling, and a new day will dawn, and we're like, okay, we're continuing towards wherever, or to the west, or wherever we're going, and they're like, great, roll to see if you get lost, and that's it. And if we roll 1 or 2, or whatever it is, out of 6, or whatever the number is, I forget, it's going to depend on your terrain, then we're lost, otherwise we're not. Neither one is good or bad, right or wrong, it's a style thing. I like it to get down. I don't mind. And the thing is, I don't mind as a player playing in that very abstracted way. Just like, even though as a GM, I the way I'm running it personally is this other way, but it's not like I object to that, but it's just different. In that case, when we're just playing at a very high abstracted level, we're just making a singular roll, then if somebody was like, ooh, I'm a ranger, so I can get a +1 to my roll, to me, that makes perfect sense. Like, just why not? Why not? Or you could base it on a background. You could base it on a quirk, like whatever it is. You can get great. You know what? Sure. We're still going to roll that die, but now you're going to get a +1 of the result, whatever that is. Like, to me, that's like, hey, that's perfect. That works. That in the game I'm running, I wouldn't want that, but I might want something else. If someone said, I'm a great, I don't know, I can find water. Like I'm a great dowser. I might say, okay, in this case, if we go back to the examples I was giving and they're trying to find a body of water, it's a little stream, and you've got some kind of dousing that you can do, and you're an expert dowser, great, I'll give you some roll to see if you can find water, because that's just a little detail. It's very situational, right? It's just a little bit. Great, dowsing, man, you got it. Go for it. But I wouldn't want a very broad navigation. You don't have to pick one, because in the game I'm playing in, right, for navigation in the wilderness, we're going to zoom out, and we're going to do that, bam. When we're in a dungeon, we're not zooming out. In the dungeon, we're all in the nitty gritty, and it's all about making those choices about what do we want to zoom out on, and what do we want to zoom in on. And skills can be good in either sense. You can have a skill that's great. This is a skill that's abstracting out a bunch of stuff that I don't want to do. I don't think it's worth our time. And we can also have skills that maybe are some really hyper zoomed in thing. Like, sure, dousing is going to help you in that zoomed in level. It's not going to work in terms of dousing isn't going to give you something that's miles and miles away. Dousing isn't going to give you water within 30 some odd square miles. It's going to give you if there's any water around you. So that one works in for very zoomed in. Climbing might be another one. Yes, I want you to inspect the rock. I want you to get your grappling hooks. I want you to use all your stuff. At the same time, there comes a point where you've done all that stuff and we still need to roll to figure it out. Because I'm not, either we're going to say that if you just set up your stuff, you're just climbing, boom, or if there's a question about it, we're still going to roll. So in which case, then maybe climbing, I would say, yeah, I'm okay with that as a skill, because even though, sure, I'm happy to delve in on some details, at some point, if you say that you're an alpinist or you're some kind of rock climber, I'll give you a little bump to it, because it's still a question. It's still something that we're going to test. Now, in the first part of a video, which I posted maybe last week on TikTok, I talked about social skills, and that I do not want social skills coming down to rolls. Social skills and observation skills. I don't want them. I don't want you going, give me my perception check. No, I don't like it. Ask me questions, investigate, interact with the environment, do that kind of thing. I don't want you just walking in a room and say, oh, investigate, and then roll some dice. Don't want it. If you like it in your game, great. I don't want it. Same thing for social skills. You're in a conversation, I want to do an insight check to tell if they're lying. Ain't going to fly for me. What I want is And this happens in my game. The player asks me, "Do I know if this guy's lying?" And I'll say, "Well, how would you know?" And then maybe they'll say, "Well, I look for his breathing, or I look to see if he's nervous, or whatever." And then maybe I'll roll some dice or whatever. But you have to make those. You have to ask about those observations. It's not, "Oh, I've got investigation. I'm going to roll." So David MC8478 said, "In my own Heartbreaker, I have moved the role in resolving social situations to observing details about the NPC to help bring them to your side. I figure people will give you what you ask for if they either want to help you or they want to do the thing you ask. So I use the roll to let the players figure what would do that. Once they have done that, no need to roll because the NPC wants to give the PCs what they want." Now that sounded intriguing to me, so I responded saying, like, "Tell me more. Like, do you have an example?" And it was because it was a little bit hard for me to grok exactly what he was talking about. So then the second email, the one that I originally pulled out of here, is what he said. So he continuing on and says, "Using 5e language and language, the procedure is first, the PCs encounter the NPC, reaction roll. If you're not familiar with the reaction rolls, because it's kind of buried in the DMG if you're playing 5th edition, it's essentially an initial roll that just says how friendly or hostile the NPC is. It's usually a 2d6 roll, more or less. It can be 1d6, whatever. Basically, on one side, on the low rolls, generally it means that they're not here for you. And if it was in dungeon, it might be attack, but they're basically hostile on one far end. It's usually weighed towards being kind of neutral, edging towards being unfriendly, then neutral, edging towards friendly, and then like hyper friendly. Basically, that's kind of the spectrum, right? So, counter the NPC, roll reaction. Then the NPCs converse or negotiate. They are given the opportunity of a perception or investigation check. Include PCs not directly involved in the conversation. They might notice artwork, documents, body language, uniform. So he's saying that, okay, so you get the conversation with the NPC, and then anybody around the party who's out there can roll their perception or investigation, and then they might pick up some nuances. And I'm not going to get into whether it should be I know I feel like as soon as I say this, folks are going to go like, "Well, yeah, no, investigation doesn't work like that." Like, I don't care. Don't at me about how investigation works. It's kind of not the point about this. And this is their words. I'm quoting them. They don't care either. Don't miss the forest for the trees here. Okay, we're not talking about technically what's perception or what's investigation or what's whatever. All right, and then they say they might notice artwork, documents, body language, uniform. Next, if the PCs can find commonality with the NPC, they can improve their relationship. E.g., we both served in the army, or I am a believer in Paylor too. Otherwise, the PCs need to negotiate a deal the NPC is willing to give. It's a form of social transaction or social trade on either the relationship or the deal. Then finally, if the NPC likes the PCs and wants to help them or wants to do what they ask, DM determination on relative balance, the NPC agrees. This may extend into trading quests to improve standing. And then he gives some examples. The shopkeeper wants to sell potions because that's their job. They don't have to like the PCs. So this might be, hey, NPC is a shopkeeper. They're unfriendly, but guess what? They want to sell potions. They want to make money. They're going to sell them. They don't have to like the customers. They just want their cash. The cleric wants to heal the party because one of the PCs is from the same church. The king wants his princess rescued. He only has to trust the PCs a little to gift the dragon slaying sword. I don't know. The dragon slaying sword might be a lot. The wizard does not want to give the PC a magic item. If the PC notices the wizard needs certain ingredients, then he could fetch them and trade. For pure OSR, you might just give the players the clues during the conversation. The whole idea arose from the problem in 5th edition of some PCs being excluded in social interaction, so it's very important to include the onlookers in gaining clues. Right. So I get what he's doing here, because in 5th edition, you have these skills, and people want to use them. People want to use their perception. People want to use their investigation. People want to use whatever skills they have. And yes, they often are building their characters around them. There might be class abilities tied into them, etc. So there are many reasons why you have these skills in there, at least mechanically, and why players, given that those skills are there, maybe want to use them. Totally understood. Now, in an old school, and if you're not familiar with OSR as a term, old school Renaissance, old school revival, games based essentially on old school D&D rules, at least at the beginning. But usually we don't have a lot of skill system. In an OSR type game, which is what I usually play and run, you have very little skill system. Certainly not one universal one in the way that you have in kind of post 2nd to 3rd edition D&D. All right. So essentially saying, look, I want to bring everybody in because what ends up happening in a social situation is one of the PCs will tend to dominate the conversation and everyone else ends up just being onlooking. So this gives them a way to have the other PCs do things and then be rewarded for doing them, in this case, utilizing their skills. Now, and I think given 5th edition, I don't think this is a bad way to run, because those skills exist, and while you could take them out, there may be a lot of knock-on consequences. One of the problems with modern D&D is it's with the way it's set up is it's very complex and complicated, in the sense that you have all these parts that they have tightly coupled together. So if you decide, hey, you know what, I'm not going to have perception in my game, you might be causing all these knock-on effects that you may not even realize, because various classes and builds and blah, blah, blah all have things that hook into perception. I don't know if they do or not. I'm just using that as an example. It's kind of like the thing with bonus acts. I don't know. There's all kinds of different things. Like if you don't have, let's say, if you were to, I don't know, get rid of hiding or something. I don't know what it would be, right? But we don't know what the knock-on effects are of various things. In an old school game, you just get rid of it usually, and it's like, whatever thing, it's going to be very simple. In 5th edition, it might not be. So I totally get the inclination to say, hey, I've got these things, let's use them. And I don't mind it in terms of 5th edition. That's how the game kind of works. Where the problem comes up for me, or what I want to do, is I don't want to just say to the party, roll your perception checks, because that isn't active on their part. And this is the problem with, I think, the social skills to begin with, is instead of the PCs being inquisitive and interacting with things that are going on, they're just kind of doing the least they need to do to get to the skill roll, which is often just, can I make a perception check? And, usually when I get something like that, I go, I don't know, can you? Like, I'm always trying to prompt the pieces, okay, well, what does it mean? Make a perception check. Like, what are you looking for? But oftentimes folks are just default to, like, I'm just taking in the entire scene, anything out of the ordinary. Does my keen eyes catch it? And that's kind of what perception is. So in my game, I would definitely be like, you got to be looking for something in particular. Tell me what you're looking for. And in an old school kind of game where you don't have those skills, that's kind of all I would need. I'm looking to see, what can I see around the shop? And then if it is something like, what was the example here? The cleric wants to kill the party because one of the PCs is from the same church. So in this case, what I'm looking for is one of the players to say, hey, does my character recognize the cleric? Maybe we'll roll some dice. Oh, yeah, the cleric goes to the same church you do. Okay, so I'm going to come to the front, or I'm going to say something, right? But it's predicated on the party being active, as opposed to the party being passive with their and then using the skill roll to do all the work for them. And I think that's what a lot of us who don't like the social skills, that's what we don't like, because it takes out of what the party is actively doing to the party being passive. And I know that's not going to work for all players, or it's going to make it more difficult for some players, because some players are just passive by nature. And if you're waiting for them to be active to give them a piece of information and they're not, I can see how, hey, using the roll kind of might egg them into action. When that person who's sitting in the back, Bob back there, who's not really doing much, and you all of a sudden you roll some dice, you ask, hey, Bob, roll your perception. Oh, you notice whatever. That's fine. I mean, you could kind of do that anyway without, if you wanted to bring Bob in, you could kind of say anyway, Bob, you noticed something no one else has noticed so far. Whatever that is, right? But I always want to err on the kind of play that I want, which is active players. So I don't want to gear my game towards the passive players. That makes sense. That's just not the game I want. It's just, it isn't. And then so for these examples, I think they work fine, but I think you can get there without having to go through the investigation or whatever, having to go through the skill check system. You can just get there by giving out clues, giving out little prompts, and then having your players be active in resolving those prompts or addressing them or finding something else. I think the other thing that somebody else pointed out, and I don't know if it's here, it might be down here, that Dan the RPG Hero 2885 said that oftentimes you might not have that any information about that PC. So he says he uses the rolls to help give him time to figure out what that PC is. Is an NPC go to the same church as the PC? Well, while the players are kind of rolling their dice and doing their numbers, you can do something to find out. I would argue that, again, you don't need to use skills for that. Something that I've used in the past, something I've seen other people use, is just give an even odd. I think it's fine. I think sometimes we get caught up in wanting to be the omniscient DM that knows all, right? Haha, there's nothing about this world I do not know. And when I'm faking it, because the reality is there's lots about the world that I don't know, the PCs are doing something, I go, oh, okay, and then I'm going to roll behind the screen, and by the time they come back to me, I will now know. And so they will never have known that I just rolled randomly to see whether he went to the church or not. Something that is totally fine is just to say, oh, that's a good question. I'm not sure. Daniel, for example, who runs the game that I play, and will basically, it's always like a 50-50 thing with him, 50% chance, but he'll ask you like, okay, which one do you want? which one of these options works better for you? And then you'll say one. Okay, well, I guess if he goes to the same church, that would definitely be positive for us. So I guess that one. Then he'll say, okay, great. Now roll a die and call even, even or odd or high or low, whatever you want, and whatever. It's usually, I think he usually does high or low. Call high or low, and if it's 1 to 3, then it's the option that was less favorable. If it's 4, 5, 6, it's the option that's more favorable. Perfect. It works. Oh yes, it does shatter the idea that you're the omniscient GM that knows everything, which I think is fine. I mean, look, I love playing with that illusion. One of my players, I got a couple of players who were kind of brand new, or at least one of them, and they were, ooh, you mean this was all set up beforehand? And I'm like, oh, I knew all. Like, it's fun, but it doesn't ultimately matter. And it can actually probably be a negative thing overall, rather than, hey, we get to help create part of the world. You know what? I didn't, you're looking at this cleric to see if he's a cleric of Palor. Well, I don't know, but it could be. Sure, why not? Roll a die. And then you've got, in the game I play, it's like you have a 50% chance of it being the thing you want, which is probably far better chances than anything else. So why not just make it so? And then you still have it. You still are able to fill in. But now, again, we're playing off of the PCs being active. We're not just feeding stuff passively, if that makes sense. But this might be a good, if you are someone who's playing 5th edition and you're wondering a way you can use perception/investigation without overwhelming your social structures, this way that David MC 8478 has got on tap might be a good way to do for you, in that it's not telling you the be all end all, but it's giving you some information. Same thing could be used for kind of intuition, will be another good one. Perception could be what you're noticing about the situation. So, for example, if the cleric, you're wondering if they're a cleric of Palor, maybe you notice the symbol of Palor or the color scheme he's wearing, or maybe if it's in his chambers, you see something that might indicate Palor, right? Whereas intuition might give you a little bit more about their attitude. That something else like that. Like you could, and again, that can play into being active by saying, hey, if I mention Palor, what happens to his eyes? If I say, oh, by Palor, that's amazing. What a great day by Palor. Do their eyes kind of get a little sparkle? Do they darken? What happens? Like you can kind of, oh, that's interesting. When you mention Palor, he seems to get a little extra glow, or his visage darkens, right? You can have fun with that, make it interactive. And I find that the social skills, for me, cut out the interaction. I mean, that's kind of what all skills do at some point, is they stop interaction and they move to a resolution. And the trick is figuring out where you want to stop the interaction, where you want to say enough interaction, time to resolve. And wherever that is, slot your skill. I think that's actually, man, I got to write that down. Because that is good.